So, at Star Wars Celebration earlier this year, we got a full rundown of Star Wars projects in the works, and animated stuff aside, we primarily heard about 2 movies and 2 live-action Disney Plus shows. Now, as I've previously discussed, Star Wars should be a franchise led primarily, if not exclusively, by movies. So, 2 films on the docket is at least a step in the right direction. Granted, there's still the problem that Ahsoka Season 2 is a Disney Plus show and not a movie, so clearly Lucasfilm hasn't actually learned this lesson, and they definitely didn't watch my video on the subject. But, since Andor has concluded, there are, for the moment, more announced live-action Star Wars movies than Disney Plus shows. And I guess that's better than nothing. But let's look at these movies for a moment, making note of where they fit into the Star Wars universe. First up, of course, is The Mandalorian and Grogu, which is done and dusted and will be out in May. This is obviously set in the Mandoverse time period, 6 years or so after the Return of the Jedi. Then we have Starfighter, directed by Sean Levy and starring Ryan Gosling. This is set, according to Levy himself, about 5 years after Episode 9, and allegedly has nothing to do with the characters and events of that movie. There's also the recently announced trilogy to be written by Simon Kinberg, set again after Episode 9 and probably filling the roles of Episodes 10 through 12. And then there are all the ghost projects, movies that have been announced by Lucasfilm, but which we have heard basically nothing about since. These include a movie by Taika Waititi, God help us all, that will presumably also be set post-Episode 9, but there's no way to know, and quite honestly, we can only hope this movie never gets made. There's the Lando movie, or show, nobody knows for sure what it could be at this point, set midway between Episodes 3 and 4, and the 3 projects announced 2 years ago at Star Wars Celebration 2023, those being the Rey movie, that is somehow not going to conflict with Simon Kinberg's trilogy, the Dave Filoni Star Wars Avengers type movie set to hopefully conclude the Mandoverse time period, and finally, James Mangold's Dawn of the Jedi movie, unsurprisingly set thousands of years in the past at the very opposite end of the spectrum from literally the entire rest of Star Wars. Now, there's a decent chance most of these projects have been quietly cancelled. Indeed, we should certainly hope so, because they will be rubbish. But just noting the ideas for these projects illuminates a massive problem with Disney's approach to Star Wars. For completeness, let's throw in the Disney Plus stuff as well. Ahsoka Season 2, unfortunately, as already mentioned, and Maul Shadowlord, set again in everyone's favorite time period between Episodes 3 and 4. All told, that's 10 projects, 8 movies, and 2 shows scattered across 4 completely distinct time periods within the Star Wars timeline. And if we lump in all the past Disney Plus content as well, we can add a 5th period in for the High Republic era. Now, while it is a good thing that the number of projected movies exceeds the number of upcoming Disney Plus shows, just making movies doesn't completely solve the franchise's problems. There's also the order of the movies to consider, and really, this is such an obvious problem that I'll just state it out explicitly. Lucasfilm is releasing Star Wars content in the wrong order and fundamentally mishandling the Star Wars timeline as a result. This includes the timeline both in-universe and out-of-universe. What I mean by that is, in-universe, the stories being told need to relate to each other and build off of one another to create a consistent narrative, with each story taking place after the previous one. Then out-of-universe, here in the real world, Lucasfilm needs to release its Star Wars content in that same order, so that we, the audience, see the events unfolding in the order they occurred, so to speak. In other words, Star Wars needs to get back to linear storytelling. Or just storytelling, really, because unless you're Christopher Nolan, that's how humans tell stories anyways. Events proceed chronologically so that the audience can trace cause and effect. This is what made the MCU so successful early on. With only a couple exceptions, it was a linear story. Each new movie took place around or after the events of the previous installment, so that even when certain films focused on separate characters and stories, there was always overarching world building happening in the background, which all culminated in Infinity War. Likewise, The Empire Strikes Back takes place after A New Hope, and Return of the Jedi then follows that. One film follows the other, each telling the next phase of the story. Now, as a side note, you might well question how the prequel trilogy succeeded, despite being made out of order from the original trilogy, and the answer there is that it was clearly telegraphed to the audience. Not only did people have 15 years to digest the fact that the first Star Wars movie was in fact Episode 4, and George Lucas was now going back and making Episode 1, but each movie started with a big label telling them which episode of Star Wars they were about to watch. Numbers have a fixed order, so numbered things are easy to follow. Observe the confusion around the post-Endgame MCU. There are no clear indications for when most of the random shows and movies being put out are occurring within the timeline. No labels, very little background world building, and so on. Modern Lucasfilm also seems to think that it is exempt from sequential storytelling and can just spit out Star Wars content wherever, bouncing to and fro all over the timeline, basically just filling in gaps in the existing story at this point. For the content aimed at the more dedicated Star Wars fans, such as the animated shows, that's fine, because those fans can keep up. But the general audience has no clue. They expect new stories to directly follow the preceding ones. Again, that's just how humans operate. This is why when Rogue One came out a year after The Force Awakens, there was a lot of confusion and complaints among the general populace about them building another Death Star. People thought Rogue One was Episode 8 because it was coming out after Episode 7. None of the marketing indicated that. Rogue One just didn't have an episode number, and it wasn't clearly stated that it was just another prequel to Episode 4. You had to figure it out from the context in the trailers, but the general audience will never know the lore well enough to do that. If Rogue One had been labeled Episode 3.75, people might have laughed at the silly numbering system, but at least there would have been no confusion about where the film fit into the story. Anyways, the point is that releasing projects scattered all over the timeline is a terrible approach for running a franchise as large as Star Wars, but clearly Lucasfilm has yet to realize this. As such, the general audience, or rather the small fraction of the general audience that bothers to watch Disney Plus shows, will continue to be confused by Star Wars projects, leading them to conclude that Star Wars is a mess and not worth trying to watch anymore. See, this is a hard truth we must accept. Average moviegoers are ignorant and lazy. They don't know the lore, and they're not interested in learning about it. They just want a good movie. And that's perfectly fine, but it is something that Star Wars, and every franchise, indeed every individual movie, needs to bear in mind. One of the reasons Tenet got mixed reviews from the audience is that it was quite confusing on first watch. You almost needed to go online and consult a diagram before then rewatching the movie again. But the general audience does not want to do homework just to watch a piece of entertainment. They don't care enough to invest any more of their time into it. They expect linear storytelling, as in, if a Star Wars movie comes out after another Star Wars movie, the new movie should take place after the previous one in universe. That consistent story thread makes remembering the whole story easier for people who don't regularly think about it outside the theater. And, as we fans well know, getting the connections between films makes them more enjoyable and more memorable. In a way, it's a fan factory. Getting a general audience member to like and remember a film series leads to them caring about the franchise and in so doing become a fan. And it feels strange to say it, given how popular Star Wars has been in the past, but that positive conversion rate is something that Star Wars really needs right now. So, it's not enough for Disney to just go back to making only Star Wars movies. Those movies also need to release in an order that matches the order of events in universe. That will keep the general audience engaged and unconfused because right now, they're lost, bored, and drifting away. Which, as I stressed in my previous video in this series, is a critical issue Lucasfilm and Disney need to address. But all this bouncing around the timeline, the lack of continuous story, and the lack of Star Wars films overall, until next May that is, points to a deeper issue, one that drives Lucasfilm's scattershot approach to the franchise, possibly without them even realizing it. Lucasfilm doesn't understand what Star Wars is. This is the very root of all the non-superficial issues Star Wars has today, but it is also a topic best saved for another video. Anyways, that's my observation. Maybe you see differently. What do you think about Disney's approach to the timeline? Do you mind if the content constantly jumps around? Would you prefer just one main storyline, or is having multiple unrelated story threads running at once okay with you? In any case, leave your comments below, like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you want to see more of this series, because there will be more, hopefully, as soon as I can get to it. But above all, thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.